The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 tiny stars trapped in glass, casting a golden glow over the upscale Manhattan restaurant. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted lamb, and the clink of fine crystal wineglasses punctuated the low hum of conversation. Harper Quinn stepped through the brass-trimmed doors of the Gilded Rose, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She wore a tailored black dress, understated but elegant, her only adornment a silver watch that once belonged to her mother. Yet, the moment she crossed the threshold, the valet's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Who are you here to see?" he asked. Twice, as if she were an uninvited guest sneaking into someone else's story. Harper murmured, "Reservation under Quinn." The valet handed her a parking slip with a look that said she didn't belong in this world of glass and gold. She straightened her spine and walked forward, her reflection flickering in the mirrored walls. Beyond the arched entrance, the main dining room unfolded like a scene from a magazine spread. There they were, her family, posed perfectly at the center table. Her brother, Mason, sat with a smile as sharp as a blade, his charcoal suit pristine. Beside him, her sister, Vivian, shimmered in a burgundy gown, her posture regal. Their niece, Lila, leaned in, whispering something with a smirk that cut through the air. As Harper approached, Lila's voice rang out, clear and cruel, no attempt to hush her words. "That's her, the one Mom keeps around like a charity project." The words landed like a slap, and Harper froze. Instinctively, she smiled, a tight, polite smile, the kind you give when someone steps on your foot in a crowded room. "And you're too composed to scream." No one at the table looked up. No one acknowledged her presence. She turned to the nearest waiter, her voice low but steady. "Excuse me, I'm with the Quinn reservation." The waiter hesitated, glancing toward the back. Before he could respond, Mason rose, his presence commanding the room like a general surveying a battlefield. "Harper," he said, his tone laced with condescension, as if addressing a stray dog. "Didn't expect you to show up." "I RSVP'd," Harper replied, her voice quiet but firm. Mason's laugh was cold, performative. "Next time, check with someone who matters." Then he turned, addressing the waiter, "The table, the entire room. We don't have room for freeloaders. Try the soup kitchen downtown." Laughter rippled from the table, polite, restrained, but unmistakable. Her father, her cousins, Vivian, they all turned their heads, their eyes fixed on their plates or the chandeliers. Anywhere but Harper. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She nodded once, as if agreeing to a minor inconvenience, and walked past Mason, her steps measured, as if heading to the restroom. Her heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of calm. No one followed her. In a quiet corner by a floor-to-ceiling window, Harper stood alone, her reflection staring back from the glass. The city skyline glittered beyond. Indifferent, this wasn't the first time her family had made her feel invisible. Invitations that never arrived, photos where her face was cropped out, group chats she was never added to. But tonight was different. Tonight was a declaration, a deliberate, calculated erasure. She thought of her mother's words, spoken years ago on a quiet porch in the Hamptons. "Even if the world turns its back on you, your family will hold you up." Her mother hadn't lived to see this version of the Quinns. Or maybe she'd chosen not to see it. Harper didn't return to the table. She slipped out of the restaurant, the hum of her family's laughter fading behind her. She didn't drive home. Instead, she found herself at the edge of Central Park, where the city's pulse softened to a whisper under a sky dusted with faint stars. She sat on a weathered bench, the cold wood pressing against her back, and pulled a small, ivory envelope from her purse. It was sealed, untouched since her mother had given it to her months before her death. Harper clutched it tightly, her voice a low hiss through gritted teeth. Never again. That night, sleep was a stranger. Harper's Brooklyn apartment was a fortress of memories, shelves lined with old files, drawers stuffed with documents she'd kept out of instinct, not sentiment. She spread them across the hardwood floor, each paper a piece of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to solve. In a box labeled, "Taxes 2010", buried in the hallway closet, she found a green folder. Inside was her mother's original will, The one that named Harper Quinn explicitly in Section 4, granting her a share of the family estate. But the version read at the funeral, notarized just weeks before her mother's hospitalization, had no Section 4. The final signature was dated 3 days before her mother's death, a weekend when Harper was in Chicago for a conference. Her phone dead from a lost signal. She fired off an email to Clara Holt, her mother's former paralegal. Clara, do you know if any changes were made to Momsville in her final 30 days? By dawn, a reply waited. Harper. Check the access logs. Something was altered remotely on a Saturday night. That's all I can say. Saturday night. Harper flipped through her planner. She'd been in Chicago, oblivious to her mother's transfer to hospice. By the time she returned, her mother was gone, buried without a word to her. That same weekend, someone had rewritten history. Harper didn't cry. She didn't rage. She moved with the precision of a surgeon, compiling data into a spreadsheet, bank records, emails, signatures. She uncovered joint accounts she'd once managed, now mysteriously reassigned, land deeds revised without her knowledge. Every discrepancy was a brick in a wall her family had built to shut her out. She contacted the legal team at Horizon Biotech, a startup she'd invested in a decade ago, back when Mason scoffed. "You don't even know what biotech means," and Vivian rolled her eyes, saying, "Stick to what you're good at, Harper." Now, Horizon was on the cusp of going public, valued at over $900 million. The boardroom at Horizon Biotech's Manhattan headquarters was a stage of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. Harper walked in at 9:58 a.m., her mother's silver watch glinting on her wrist. A charcoal gray suit tailored to fit her resolve. Mason sat at the head of the table, Vivian beside him, both radiating the confidence of people who believed they'd already won. Harper didn't smile. She didn't speak. She opened her laptop, connected it to the projector, and let the first slide speak for itself. A state timeline review and discrepancy log. The invitation arrived in Harper Quinn's inbox like a flare in the dark. National Women's Leadership Summit, speaker nomination. The subject line was simple, but the words that followed carried weight. You've been recommended by someone who believes in the power of quiet strength. Harper sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop casting shadows across the scattered papers, bank records, deeds, emails. That had become her arsenal. She clicked accept and whispered to herself, "This time, on my terms." The summit was held in a grand ballroom in Chicago, a world away from the gilded Manhattan restaurant where her family had tried to erase her. The room buzzed with energy, hundreds of unfamiliar faces, people who didn't know the Quinn name or its tangled history. They weren't here for her bloodline. They were here for what she'd overcome. As Harper stepped onto the stage, the screen behind her lit up with her name, spelled correctly, Harper Quinn. The applause rose, warm and unforced, a sound she hadn't heard in years. She took a breath, letting the silence settle like dust before she spoke. "I never wanted a war," she began, her voice steady, each word a stone carefully placed. "I only wanted a seat at the table. And when that seat was denied, time and again, I didn't beg, I didn't wait, I built the table myself." The room leaned in as Harper recounted the night at the Gilded Rose, where her brother Mason called her a freeloader in front of a room full of chandeliers and silence. She spoke of the family albums where her face was cropped out, the group chats she was never invited to, the will rewritten to erase her name. "They didn't just forget me," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "They edited me out of stories I helped write. They made me invisible in photos where I stood shoulder to shoulder with them." Her voice wavered for a moment. Just one, as she recalled her niece Lila's sneer, "The one mom keeps around like a charity project." But she caught herself, her resolve a steel thread pulling her forward. "When I didn't scream, they called me unstable. When I refused to bow, they said I was ungrateful. And then, one night, a man looked me in the eye and said, 'We don't serve freeloaders.'" She paused, letting the words hang in the air, sharp as broken glass. The audience was still, their breaths held. Then Harper smiled, not with bitterness, but with a clarity that cut deeper. "Funny thing is," she said, her tone almost too calm, "now they're all lining up to serve me. The applause began slowly, a ripple that swelled into a wave, rolling through the ballroom like thunder. Harper stepped down from the podium, her steps unhurried, her mother's silver watch catching the light. She didn't linger for the handshakes or the photo ops. She drove back to her Brooklyn apartment, the night air crisp and clean, as if the city itself had exhaled. Something had shifted inside her, not just belonging, but ownership. For the first time, the weight in her chest was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty she couldn't name. Back home, Harper found a small package in her mailbox. Inside was a note, handwritten on creamy paper. "You spoke for all of us." She read it once, then tucked it into a wooden box on her bookshelf, alongside a faded birthday card from her mother. The card's looping script read, "Don't let anyone tell you this family runs without you." Harper traced the words with her finger, her throat tightening. She could still see her mother on the Hamptons' porch, sunlight spilling across her face, saying, "They think they're in charge, but you're the one holding it all together." That memory had once been a comfort. Now it was a spark. The next morning, Harper opened her laptop to a news alert. Horizon Biotech surpasses $1.2 billion valuation. 10 years ago, when she'd scraped together every dollar to invest in the startup, Mason had laughed, and Vivian had smirked. "Stick to what you're good at." Now, Harper was the majority shareholder. She signed the documents in sweatpants, alone in her apartment, the weight of the pen heavier than the ink. The name badge from the summit sat on her desk, misspelled as Ms. Quinn. She slid it next to her mother's card and said aloud, "They still can't get my name right, but they'll never forget who I am." Days later, a package arrived, a USB drive labeled in her mother's handwriting, "For Harper only." She plugged it into her laptop, her hands trembling. A grainy video flickered to life, recorded weeks before her mother's death. "Harper," her mother's voice said, soft but firm, "I know they've made you feel like a shadow, but you were the light that made this family real." The screen went dark, but the words burned inside her. That afternoon, her father appeared at her door, the first time in nearly a year. His face was lined with regret, his hands clutching a yellowed envelope. "Your mother wrote this a week before she lost her voice," he said, his voice breaking. "I was too afraid to give it to you. I was a coward." The letter read, "I left instructions for you to lead. If they won't listen, take what's yours. They'll try to erase you. But you always knew where the cracks in the foundation were." Harper folded the letter and placed it beside the USB. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The truth was hers now. Not just in words but in action. She'd already reclaimed the Horizon assets, transferred $1 billion to her own holdings. She'd faced Mason and Vivian in the boardroom, watched them leave in silence, their power crumbling like sand. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting a legacy they'd tried to steal. A week later, Harper stood in her apartment, staring at the city skyline through her window. The note from the summit, her mother's letter, the USB, they were more than relics. They were proof that her worth didn't depend on her family's applause. It came from knowing who she was, even when no one was watching. She opened her laptop again, drafting an email to Horizon's board. Subject: Next steps for leadership transition. The words flowed easily, each one a brick in the table she was building, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been erased. "I didn't win because I shouted louder," she wrote, pausing to glance at her mother's watch. "I won because I stood longer." After the shouting stopped, the city hummed outside, indifferent but alive. Harper closed her laptop and whispered, "This isn't the end of a name. It's the beginning of a legacy." The strength wasn't in the noise she could have made, the scenes she could have caused. It was in her refusal to disappear. In the quiet power of standing tall when the world expected her to crumble. Hey kiem tra ju toi kao choyan nazem ko gap loi lap lai noi dung kong kao choyan ko logic kong ko la mo kao choyan suyen suet kong ko hap dan noi nghe kong. Ket luan ko gap loi gi bat thuong kong. Page by page, she laid it bare, emails with timestamps, IP addresses, a power of attorney signed in Mason's name on a day Harper was giving a keynote in Seattle. Boarding passes, photos, and transcripts proved her absence. Then she pulled up Horizon's trust account. 217A. With assets totaling $1 billion. One click, she said, her voice steady as stone. And it transfers to 3R Capital Holdings. She clicked. The screen flashed. Transfer complete. The account was hers. Mason stared, his jaw tight, as if the numbers were a language he couldn't read. Vivian's eyes darted toward the door, searching for an escape. This isn't what Mom would have wanted. She stammered. No, Harper said, her gaze unyielding. It's what she planned for. You just didn't think I'd notice. Silence swallowed the room. One by one, they filed out, Mason, Vivian, the others, leaving behind a vacuum where their authority once stood. Harper gathered her things, her movements deliberate. A junior board member slipped her a folded note as he passed. They're planning something. Watch your back. She nodded once, whispering to herself. Let them try. This is where the story pauses. The first chapter of Harper Quinn's journey, a tale of betrayal. Quiet resilience. And the audacity to reclaim what was stolen. She didn't just fight for her place at the table, she built her own. Piece by piece, with the weight of truth as her foundation. If you'd like to continue with the next chapters or focus on a specific moment, let me know.